There is a man who walked across the Sahara Desert and accidentally broke the global economy. Not through war. Not through conquest. Not through the kind of violence that European history books celebrate and mythologize. He broke it by being too wealthy. Too generous. Too magnificent for the medieval world to process. And that man was African. That kingdom was African. That gold was African. And if nobody ever told you that story, if you grew up learning about ancient economies and medieval trade and the foundations of global finance without ever hearing the name Mansa Musa, then what you experienced was not an accident. It was a curriculum. It was a choice. It was the deliberate architecture of erasure. Understanding what Mansa Musa did in 1324 is not just a history lesson. It is a reclamation. For every member of the African diaspora who was taught that their ancestors built nothing, owned nothing, contributed nothing to the grand story of human civilization, this is the counter-evidence. This is the proof etched in gold. This is the ledger that was never supposed to find its way back to you. But it did. And today, we are going to do the math. To understand what happened in 1324, you have to understand what the Mali Empire was. Not as a footnote. Not as an honorable mention in a world history textbook wedged between the Byzantine Empire and the Mongol conquest. You have to understand it as the dominant economic superpower of the medieval world. The Mali Empire, at its peak in the 14th century, stretched across nearly 2 million square kilometers of West Africa. It encompassed what are today the nations of Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mauritania, and part of Niger and Burkina Faso. It controlled the trans-Saharan trade routes that connected sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa, the Middle East, and through those corridors, to Europe. It sat atop the Bambouk and Bure goldfields, which by the 14th century were producing more than half of the entire world's gold supply. The man who ruled this empire in 1324 was Mansa Musa I, born around 1280, also known as Musa Kete I, 10th Mansa, which means Emperor of the Mali Empire. He came to power around 1312 after his predecessor, Abubakar II, sailed into the Atlantic Ocean with 2,000 ships searching for the edge of the world and never returned. That story alone deserves its own documentary. But Musa stayed. Musa built. And by 1324, he had accumulated personal wealth that modern economists estimate, when adjusted for today's values, at approximately $400 billion. Some estimates go higher. The point is that no human being in the recorded history of the planet has ever been verifiably wealthier than Mansa Musa. Not Rockefeller. Not Bezos. Not any figure produced by industrial capitalism or the technology revolution. An African emperor in the 14th century holds that title. In 1324, Mansa Musa embarked on his Hajj, his pilgrimage to Mecca, as required by his Muslim faith. He did not travel quietly. He traveled with a caravan of 60,000 people. Some accounts say more. Among them were 12,000 enslaved servants, each carrying 4 pounds of gold bars. He brought 80 camels, each carrying between 300 and 500 pounds of gold dust. He brought heralds, soldiers, merchants, doctors, scholars, and musicians. He brought his senior wife, Inari Kunate, along with 500 of her personal servants. He dressed his entire retinue in the finest Persian silks and brocaded fabrics. And as he traveled through Ghana, Mali, the Sahara, into Egypt, and through the Arabian Peninsula toward Mecca, he spent and gifted gold with extraordinary, almost incomprehensible liberality. In Cairo, he met with the Sultan of Egypt, Al-Nasir Muhammad, and spent so lavishly, distributed gold so freely to the poor and to officials alike, that he flooded the Egyptian gold market with supply that utterly outpaced demand. The immediate economic result was catastrophic. The price of gold in Egypt collapsed. It depreciated so severely that it took 12 full years for the Egyptian economy to recover its pre-Musa equilibrium. 12 years. One man's generosity created over a decade of economic instability in one of the most powerful nations on earth. The same effect rippled through the economies of the Arabian Peninsula, through the markets of the Levant and the trading cities of the Mediterranean coast. Merchants who had built their entire business models around gold's stable value watched those models collapse. The economies disrupted included Egypt, the Mamluk Sultanate, the Sultanate of Morocco, and significant portions of the early Ottoman trading network. Four distinct economic zones destabilized by the passage of one man through them. The math is not complicated once you understand the mechanics. When gold supply increases suddenly without a corresponding increase in the goods and services that gold can purchase, the value of each unit of gold falls. Prices of everything denominated in gold rise. That is inflation. Mansa Musa created hyperinflation across an entire region by simply being generous. He recognized the damage later, and according to several historical accounts, he attempted to correct the disruption on his return journey by borrowing gold back from Egyptian merchants at high interest rates, deliberately removing gold from circulation to restore its value. He was, in effect, performing a 14th century version of monetary contraction policy. This man understood macroeconomics before the field had a name. Now we must talk about what was done to this story. Because Mansa Musa's pilgrimage was not a secret. It was not a quiet event that slipped between the cracks of history. European cartographers in 1375, just 50 years after the pilgrimage, placed Mansa Musa's image on the Catalan Atlas, one of the most important navigational documents of the medieval period. He was depicted sitting on a throne, holding a golden scepter and a gold nugget, his image dominating the African continent. The Arab historian Al-Umari, writing in Cairo in the 1330s, documented Musa's visit in extraordinary detail after spending years interviewing Egyptian officials who had direct contact with the emperor. The 14th century scholar Ibn Battuta visited Mali in 1352 and recorded its wealth, its justice systems, its civic order, and its sophistication. Ibn Khaldun, the father of historiography and sociology, documented the Mali Empire's economic and political systems in the same century. This record existed. It was available. It was cited. And then, deliberately and systematically, it was buried. The colonial project required a specific version of African history. It required a continent populated by primitive peoples with no civic infrastructure, no architectural achievements,